All right, we're going holding by Pirke Avos, ethics of our fathers. Again, we're going holding by Pirke Avos, ethics of our fathers. We are in second chapter. We are in the second chapter, and this is Mishna 16. Again, we're going holding by Pirke Avos, ethics of our fathers. We are in second chapter, Mishna 16. Part 26, 27, it's going to probably part 28, 29, 30. Going to be a lot of parts here. This Mishnah. So, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua says that an evil eye, evil inclination, hatred of other people, remove a person from this world. So, we're speaking the last number of weeks, had a few weeks off, Passover, and back to a normal schedule here. So, we spoke the last number of weeks about this idea of the evil eye. And we've been speaking about Rabbeinu Yonah. Now, Rabbeinu Yonah says that when someone's jealous, right, in general of someone else, means that they're not happy with what they have, right? To see that their friend has more money, has, let's say a better spouse, better kids, whatever it is, causes damage to them, causes damage to their friends as well. It's, any psychologist will tell you, it's bad, keeping things inside, right? The person bear a grudge, let's say it's a lack of emunah, lack of faith and belief in God. What's coming to you, a person may think, I deserve this, they don't deserve that, right, etc. So essentially, they are jealous of what they don't have. Right. And again, it can cause depression. It can cause other things because they're not happy. They're not happy with what someone else has. Now, in general, as we said before, if, God gave the money, right? God gave, let's say, a person money and they're successful, whatever it may be, why should I care one way or the other? Right? It doesn't affect me as long as, they're not flaunting it if they use it, they use it the right way. So there's something come up recently. Someone mentioned they have a relative, it's got a lot of money. It's got a huge amount of money. And they bought a house or they bought an apartment, let's say. And then recently they decided to buy, let's say, the apartment next door. I don't know what they're gonna do with it, combine it. I don't know, make this huge mansion, right? Okay. So you can say, so what? Let a person do whatever they want, with their own money, let them use it, for whatever. But why would that, go against our grain? It shouldn't. They want to spend their money that way. Someone wants to spend money, I don't know, save the whales or, some other stupid thing. Okay, it's their choice. A lot of people could be helped with that money. Very good. They choose not to. Okay. But what comes out of this? What comes out of this is a person can look at this person and say how sad it is, right? You can spin it over here. Not to feel bad you don't have, and you're scraping dimes together and it's hard and this and that. This person, I'm not saying not working hard, whatever. They be working hard, making a lot of money, very good. Yeah. Okay. So why should I care? I shouldn't care. Right? They want to use it that way. It's their choice. I'm not even going to ask the question why God gives some, such person such money, such abundance of wealth. Let's say. Well, so they can blow it. It goes to portion of the world to come. I mean, whatever. We spoke about different aspects of this, but there's one thing. One thing I was thinking about that is someone had said, how sad, how sad it is. What is this money, going to bring? And imagine this person has a spouse that's sick. Yeah. Money comes in handy, certainly does, but can it buy health? Can't buy health. It can prolong a person's life, right? That I think is true. right? A person may have an advantage of being able to do certain things or go through certain treatments or whatever because they have money, but the inevitable is the inevitable. At some point, a person is going to die. So even with that, so they feel like going out, buying an expensive car or buying a house or whatever. But at the end of the day, a person should not even say, why would God give such a person money? That type of money. They're not using it the right way, right? They're wasting it. They don't see the value of life, right? Eat, drink, and be merry, lest tomorrow I die. So let them use it. Maybe it's a Rome hobble. Yeah, but what comes out of this? Sad. That's all they have. Yeah, not only is it all they have, but they have no enjoyment of life, real enjoyment of life. They might have, let's say they get enjoyment from their kids. Let's say, okay, right, to a certain extent. But what are they busy doing? They're busy chasing their tails. They're busy trying to get more wealth, let's say. Because that's all they have, right? They have nothing. I know someone else got a ton of money, and his kids are a disaster. No relationship with either one of them. So what good is the money? What good is the money? So you can go to fancy country clubs. You can have a let's say house on the beach, and it's beautiful and this and that. Okay, where they can spend their money any way they want. That's their choice. Obviously, their obligations to give charity, give at least 10% or up to 20%, right? Let's say, okay, let's say this person's doing neither, or he's giving, I don't know, the stupid things, whatever it is. But you look at a person's life. Again, we're not here to judge, right? You can't judge someone unless unless you've been in their shoes. Well, let's analyze for a second. You have somebody got a ton of money, prestige, let's say, and he's got no relationship with his kids. Zero. So I asked the $1 million question. And the $1 million question is, what's the money worth? Now, some people, okay, they have kids, 1 kid, 2 kids, whatever, whatever it is. But they don't care. What's more important is their career. What's more important is where they go and how they look and, and all this. So, either a person has 2 kids or they have 1 child, whatever it is. Yeah, what's that relationship worth? So some people may say, okay, I have 2 kids. You pin them down, they probably will admit they don't have such a great relationship. Okay. But for some people, which is kind of crazy to think about it, because everyone wants to have some sort of legacy, at least, a family, before they die. At least that's why people have kids in general, because they want to have a next generation. Right? They want to have a forthcoming generation. But in general, even if you have that, but you don't have a proper relationship, I'm not saying, extenuating circumstances and this and that. In general, a person can think, I got power, I got money, I got fame, I got this. Yeah, I also have kids, but the relationship with their kids is minimal. Right? It's, that doesn't bother them. That's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Right? Why would I say that? Because most people would say, what's the most important thing to them in life? In general. Most people are going to say family. Right? Most people are going to say family. Very good. But how do they utilize family? What's the relationship like? They get pleasure, like Noah Weinberg would say, blessed memory, started the Yeshiva Torah. All right, yeah, somebody goes, what's your greatest pleasure? Says family. Says, sorry, my kids. So, He said, what's your greatest, you know, thing that you have, that's painful for you? So he said, my kids. So he asked him, okay, let's go back. He said, your greatest pleasure is what? His kids? So he said, all right, how many kids do you have? He says, one. So Noah said, what's the matter? Too much pleasure? What's talking about where he couldn't have kids? Right? Then, it kind of looked bad to say, well, how many kids you have? Well, I can only have one. Well, okay. Right? We're not talking about a case like that. Could have had more. Right? Now, the question is, what's the relationship? They can say, kids when they're younger, you get smaller problems. When they're older, you get bigger problems. Okay, but what's the relationship like? If you don't have such a great relationship, yeah, that's sad. But again, it's a very hard thing. In general, it's a hard generation. It's really a hard generation to raise kids, but a person's going to grow up in a messed up family, so they may not know how to have a relationship with kids. Okay. That could be. But that should be the source of a person's greatest pleasure. Now, kids don't always do what we want them to do. Don't always go in the direction really that they should. So what's one of the hardest things for a parent? One of the hardest things for a parent is to see a child struggle and to see a child fail or, go on a downward spiral, right? Someone was just telling me, someone was telling me last week, 3 kids, they don't have a great relationship with any of them per se. One, I'd say 2 are probably stable, relatively stable, and 1 totally unstable, right? Totally unstable. Now, a person's got a PhD, and whatever, different things have happened. Different things have happened. Now, a person looks at it and says, what a waste. All this effort in, right? All this effort, this person worked very hard, has a PhD, let's say, again, not so big in PhDs, but okay, has the ability to teach, hasn't gone so well. They struggled in other ways. It's painful. Painful for a parent to watch their kid flush themselves down the toilet. It's hard, right? There's no question. So they were venting to me. So I said, well, this person would have listened to me years ago. Things might turn out different. I'm not rubbing it in their face. But they agreed. And they gave this advice. Other people gave the same advice. It wasn't rocket science. What the advice should have been, right? And where this person could be today. They didn't take the advice. When they thought they knew better. They don't have to listen to anyone. They're going to do what they want. Okay. There are other things. Even the person failed could have done other things. Could have been at a different stage of life right now. Yeah, a very, very different stage of life. They didn't do it. They can say it's God's cruelty. And look, person had tests, right? Person had tests. And one of those tests, again, it's not an easy test by any stretch, and that is rejection. Person thinks they're doing a good thing, they get slammed. Not everyone, has the ability to do what they want to do. As we said before, someone who wants to teach or whatever, give over information, not everyone's gifted doing that, even if they have the knowledge. Or they have great knowledge in any subject, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the subject is. If they cannot give it over, right? I've heard people say, you have to explain it to someone who's like a 5-year-old. You can't give it over to a 5-year-old and you can't explain it, right? I won't be that simplistic, but imagine someone teaching a college setting, let's say. And the college greatest of all things, but let's say, and the students don't feel they're getting what they need. They don't feel, for whatever reason, they don't feel they're getting, what they need. They don't understand the material. Let's say, person not available. I don't know, right? Giving over is a very hard thing. Not everyone has had success. There are people who've tried and they failed. Right? Now, what happens when a person fails? Yeah, rejection. Rejection. Now, what happens to, their level of knowledge? They still have the level of knowledge, right? They still have the level of knowledge. Very good. But if they can't give it over, or other people feel that it's not being given over the right way, so the person failed. And if the person failed, how much is the institution gonna, give them a leash to keep doing this? Maybe a couple of years, maybe a semester, 2 semesters. I don't know. I don't know what the criteria is, right? But they're going to kill the person pretty quick. If they fail, they're not getting. They're not producing. They're not giving what they need to. Okay. Now the person can say, I'm doing everything the best of my ability. Giving over, it's their fault, right? Again, who's to blame here? It's a good question. Who's to blame, right? But again, even with children, we'll make it very simple. Even with children, if a child feels they're not getting X, Y, or Z, but the parents, is not true. Of course, we're giving this, we're giving that, whatever. But the child doesn't feel it. Right? We mentioned this many times. The parent has to change tactics. If the child's not getting the message, or they feel they're not getting the message, let's say, then, the parent obviously has to be the bigger person. Can't say, well, I've done my best. You have to deal with it. I made it very clear. To them, it's not clear. Okay. Yeah, that means they're not getting the message. Again, I'm making it very simple. Not talking about where people are mentally challenged. Not talking about any of these things. Something very simple. The child feels they're not getting what they need to get. Child doesn't feel it. So what does the parent have to do? The parent has to give over the way the child needs to hear it. Now that means the parent may have to change. They may have to change the way they deal with them. Good. But if the child feels they're not getting the message, or they're not getting what they need, then the parent has to change. Now, as adults, it gets much more complicated. Much more complicated. Because the child can say, you weren't there for me, you didn't do this for me, and then it spirals out of control. So it's not true. You try, maybe try and downplay it. I don't know, whatever it may be. A child can have a gripe against the parent and say, you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, or you didn't do the other thing, where you should have. Okay. Nobody is perfect here, right? The child, ultimately, who should their idols be? The parents. That's who they should be. Now, we live in a messed up generation, right? So, parents, you don't have no license to be a parent. It's very easy to be a parent, biology 101, right? 101A. But again, you have to know what you're doing. It's not easy. Not easy. What if a child feels in general? They feel you're not defending them. You're not behind them. But you feel you are. So there can be friction. And again, it gets, it can get a little more complicated when a child hits adolescence and hormones go, crazy. So, they're young adults, but they're not really adults, right? Not really adults per se, but, it has to be mutual respect up to a point. So it's complicated. A child-parent relationship is complicated. In most relationships. But this is more complicated because the child sees the parent on a regular basis. They see the good, they see the bad. Sometimes the parent can just be totally stressed out. They lash at the kid, right? They lash out. I'm not saying it's permissible. Sometimes the person just explodes and someone takes the brunt of it. I don't, again, we're not talking, mental health issues. If there are issues like that, cause other problems. Okay. Yeah, life is not simple. Life 100% is not simple. So I've heard cases both ways where parents will have nothing to do with a child will not, later will not have anything to do with the parent, and vice versa. Yeah, for the older people, say, yeah, I know some people they just cut their kids off. It doesn't have nothing to do with their kids because of certain things that happen. Now, it could be ego, gets in the way. It could be terrible things. I'm not saying not, but with all these things, sometimes, yeah, we may have to get advice. Yeah, Dr. Spock back in the day were people, a lot of people followed him, read his books, child education. Yeah, never read any of them, so I can't say, if he was on the mark, if he was on the mark or not. When I was growing up, I mean, obviously, parents want to hide things from kids, they won't tell you, right? But, I grew up, among adults, never heard anything like this. I mean, it doesn't mean, maybe they can go for advice. I don't know. But reading parenting books, going to parenting classes. I mean, something, unless they really were very good at hiding it, okay. Yeah. Circles I saw that I was around, never heard such a thing. Never heard such a thing. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not going to go that far. I'm sure I'm sure there are plenty of people. I didn't take a survey, but I'm sure there were plenty of people who read Dr. Spock. Yeah, it sold millions of copies. Yeah, but again, I'm just telling personal experience. Never heard such a thing. Parents asking other people for advice, reading books on it. I'm sure there were people that were. Sure that people were. Some of these things are kind of hard to hide unless the parents are very good. Let's say there was a parenting class somewhere, and they want to lie to their kid where they're going. Oh, we're going, we're going bowling, we're going here, we're going there. Okay. Yeah. Eventually the kid will find out, probably. Right. But, in either case, the books that sell, and certainly, 20, 30 years ago, what were the books that are selling? They were selling the most self-help books. Why self-help books? Because something was lost. Right. So, something was lost. So I would say, even back 20, 30 years ago, or more, why should there be a need at all for classes in parenting? Why should there be a need? Right? Where should parenting be learned from? From your parents. And how are they going to learn? Where are they going to learn parenting? From their parents. All the way down. But something got lost. Exile, assimilation. There's a story I mentioned this before. Akiva Tatz should be well. The rabbi now in England, used to live here in Israel for many years. At Or Sameach, gave a class in Jewish philosophy. He should be well. He was a cousin to Rav Simcha Wasserman. Simcha Wasserman started many yeshivas in the States. He left Europe before the war. During the war, he was able to escape. His father was Rav Chana Wasserman, Shem Yikam Damo, God should avenge his blood. Right, was head of the yeshiva in Baranovich. Was murdered by the Nazis. Student of the Chofetz Chaim. And his son, Rav Simcha, started all these yeshivas, over America. Never married to have kids. Right, that's really the punchline here. So Rabbi Tatz, cousin of his, asked him, people call you, contact you from all over the world about child education, but you never had kids. You never had kids. How is it possible? How is it possible you can give advice, even some of the toughest cases, this and that? How could you give advice to other parents if you never had kids? So the answer, as we said, was that he didn't have kids, right? But his answer was, I learned from my parents. Everything I learned about parent education, even though he himself didn't merit to have kids, he learned from his parents. It's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Yeah. Now, today, again, I would say the relationship A person's going to learn the good and the bad from parents. It's going to go both ways. Going to learn the good and the bad. Now, every generation today, let's say every couple of years, it's like the Chofetz Chaim says, that before Messiah comes, generation going to go much quicker. So like every few years, it's like a new generation. So every generation has their things. Difficulties dealing with kids, in the beginning of the 20th century, right? You had, Jews, straying away from Torah by leaps and bounds because of all kinds of things: socialism, communism, democracy. Yeah, all kinds of things. So each generation has the difficulty of raising kids, right? That's the curse. That's one of the curses from the snake. That not only are women going to have difficulty in childbirth, but they're also going to have difficulty in what? In raising kids. I mean, they're not the only ones. Obviously, if they have a spouse, right, it goes hand in hand. But still, they're gonna be, they're gonna be raising kids. But it's gonna be hard. Now, some people are gonna have exemplary kids. They don't have so much difficulty. Others could have very difficult kids. Others could have, kids on the spectrum. Others could have kids, mental health issues. They could have kids, ADHD, all kinds of things. All kinds of things. Now, a person has, a number of kids, has influenced one kid to another, and how it affects the family structure. Then you got financial issues. You got a lot of things that can weaken and destroy family structure. Certainly can. So yeah, a person, even on their best day, still may need advice. A kid says this, or a kid says that. Like what do you answer? If a kid asks about, the age-old question, Tzadik Varado, right? Bad things happen to good people. You say, oh, he's a heretic. I got to find someone to deal with him, this, that. Or you say, you don't ask those questions. No, today, you got to deal with these questions. Now, in schools, obviously you got to cover ground. Other things, you can't just have, someone, spit out a question like that. It's going to attract the whole class. But a child needs to get an answer. Now, if they don't need, what's the problem? Problem is, why is the kid asking the question? Are they asking it because they want to be heretical and put heretical ideas, in the minds of other people? Maybe they have to, determine obviously where it comes from. But I would think in general, where are a lot of these questions going to come from? Why is someone going to ask this question? Because they want to know the answer. They saw, someone suffer, someone suffered tremendously, and the family suffers, let's say, because of it. So, just by Mourner's house last week, Thursday, and whatever, a good friend of mine, and daughter died, 27, lung cancer. Where did a 27-year-old get lung cancer? Never smoked. But the more you hear about, who she was and what she represented and, and her family and this and that, it's mind-boggling. As it says in Shir, Song of Songs, God plucks the roses. The rose, he doesn't take, in general, people, he takes the best of the best, right? He can take someone very young. And really, 10,000 Jews probably should have been killed. So he takes one, or he takes five, or he takes three, right? It's not the topic here, but, you're there, and it's just, going to a mourner's house is never fun anyway. Even if someone older already, they live till their 90s, let's see. However they died, it doesn't really matter, right? But okay, they have a full life. Something like that. Lung cancer, 27. It's uncanny. Or someone else, early 30s, didn't wake up. Also, like two little kids. You know, they don't have answers. It's tragic. So you can say, well, you can't take life for granted, this and that. Yeah, it's true. But it's devastating. It's a normal reaction. It's devastating. You know, so going to this mourner's house, you know, that I went to was like, I was just, you know, it's more intense than a normal mourner's house. You know, and it makes sense. You know, 21-year-old is, you know, killed in, you know, fighting in Gaza. Went someone like that also 6 months ago, 4 or 5 months ago. You know, a good friend of mine. Someone I used to learn with. Son, you know, killed there. 21. You know. And he had like 4 or 5, you know, of his friends. He had to go to their funerals. I mean, like, it's terrific. Say it's war, that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter why. Yeah, but you're there left picking up the pieces. So if someone's asking the question because they're in pain, the much bigger difference, just, you know, if they're asking the question like the evil son. Because the evil son doesn't deserve an answer in the Haggadah. Right? So God says you blunt his teeth. There's a good reason you blunt his teeth, because they're not looking for an answer. If he's throwing out things, heretical ideas, this and that, and the other one answer's got an agenda, he's woke, let's say, okay. I'm not going to waste my time answering him. That's different. When someone, you know, legitimately has a question, okay, you need a time to be able to deal with it. You know, you can't take up a whole class, you know, days on end, otherwise you don't cover any ground. Okay. But if the kid gets blown off, and blown off enough times where they say, see, the Torah doesn't have answers. Random things happen. So if random things happen, you know, I want to enjoy life. I want to enjoy life. So I'm going to give up all this stuff. Why? Because no answers. Now, that is bad on the side of the educator. This person deserves an answer. If you don't know an answer, you say it's a good question, I'm going to do some research, I'm going to speak to people, I'll get back to you. Or, you know, it's not appropriate to ask the question now. We will deal with it, you know, in a different form. Whatever it may be, you have to deal with it. So back in the day, years ago, you know, what would people say? You're not allowed to question, you know, that's heretical. You're going to cause other people to ask the same question. It's going to bring everybody down. You don't want to do that. You don't want to entertain the possibility. Today, you know, across the spectrum, they'll say, let them ask the question. Right? Let them ask the question, give an answer. Now the question is how you give the answer and in what context. And now, you know, now it's going to be done, but they deserve an answer. The kid feels like you don't have an answer or you're blowing them off, they sense it. You know, they're not stupid, they sense it. So you have to give an answer at some level. You know, and, you know, at some point, maybe you can't give it right then. You know, in the class, you're going to say, okay, we're going to take a class. You know, take one class, let's say at the end of the week, whatever it is, we're going to take one class. I'll let you ask whatever you want. You can ask whatever you want. That'll give kids, you know, good self-esteem. Say, oh, see, I got a good question. It's a legitimate question. I'm not being blown off. Now, they might not like the answer. Oh, that's a different issue. So the person giving over the answer better know what they're talking about. Or bring someone in that does. Because once a kid sees contradictions, and I don't agree with this, but, you know, some kids will say, well, I saw this rabbi do this, and I saw this rabbi say that, you know, and they're held to a higher standard, which they should be. Okay, person of influence, they should be held to a higher standard. Very good. You know, but they'll say, why is it good for them to do this and not anyone else? Or they catch them, they got caught doing certain things. What does that do? Loses their faith in the system. Because they're going to say, well, he's supposed to be teaching. He's supposed to be a rabbi. He's supposed to be, you know, on a higher level, this and that. How can you do this, do that, do the other thing? Okay. You know, it doesn't mean people are, you know, people are perfect. They can certainly cause damage. Very true. Right? They cause enough damage. You fire them. That's what you have to do. Right? You know, again, depends on the circumstance, depends what it is. what's been said, but they have a tremendous amount of influence. Tremendous amount of influence. As we said, kids are not stupid. They see right through it. And there are some kids that will lose faith in the system and lose faith in God and Torah because there are people who don't do what they say. Right? It's kind of like do as I say, not as I do. They catch them in contradictions. And again, it doesn't mean we're perfect. Rabbis can make mistakes. They can make serious mistakes. Right? There's no question. But a person can say, well, even if a person of influence and they're not doing the right thing, why should I take Judaism seriously? Now that's the wrong attitude. Just because they did something, even if it's egregious. Again, I'm not here to judge. Even if it's egregious, you got a bad egg. You got a seriously bad egg. Now, what happens if they try and cover it up? There's a story of somebody that in a certain city, person was a pedophile, and they went to the police, and Shiva and different people gave him a hard time. Why are you doing this? Why are you putting his name through the mud? This and that. Let's say, right? The guy's guilty. Guy 100% guilty. They flipped the script and made the family to be pariahs. So they had no choice. They had no choice. They had to leave. They had to leave the community. They moved somewhere else. It's a horrific thing. You call it bullyism. You call it trying to protect people. Whatever. This person is a menace. He has to be called out. You have to worry about asking rabbis this and that. You got good enough proof. You call it out. You got to turn them in. That's what you got to do. And this person got all kinds of pressure. The other way. Why are you doing this? Going to ruin his family. Going to ruin his reputation. Never be able to teach anywhere. Well, guess what? He shouldn't be around children. This guy shouldn't be around children for good reason. They fine. He won't teach here, but he can't blackball him all over. A guy cannot be around children. Period. Let him find another job. Cannot be in education. Right? Cannot be in education. You got to find something else to do. To make money. But it's his reputation. It's this. Again, the guy's a menace. Guy's a menace. Yeah. So this is more of an extreme case. What if, like we said before, you can't teach? And kids are not getting what they need. But the teacher's being protected. Also a problem. And someone's got a child, right? We use this as an example. Kid's got ADHD. He's a kid, right? He's got ADHD. And he just clashed with one teacher. Majorly clashed. The days he just didn't go, he got behind, other things, and the school didn't do anything. The parent begged school to do something, this, that. School never stepped up. They took him out. They took him out, put him in another school, and whatever. Right now, he's doing all right. Again, I'm not here to malign schools, right? But this parent said, if I don't get them out now, this kid's just going to spiral out of control. So they got to protect the child. Okay. If the school, they said, if you don't do anything to help me, then I'm going to take this kid out of school. I'm just going to take him out, pull him out. As time went on, they dragged their feet for whatever reason. Yeah, they didn't seem to do anything. They didn't move the child to another class. They could have moved him to another class. They didn't move the child. They whatever reason they didn't want to do it. School didn't want to do it. The parent, scared what's going to be with this kid, took him out. Pulled him out. Trying to save his life here. But they looked at other schools, this, that, and hopefully they found a good school. Right? Again, I'm only hearing one side. Right? So I'm not hearing the side, the side of the school, but again, you have an obligation to the best of your ability to protect your child. That's what you got to do. for their benefits, not the way you want it to look, not the way, not the way it should be. But what's the bottom line? You got to protect your child, right? What's best for them? I always say if kids survive the system and they're still intact, well, that's good. So what does that say? The system is what it is. If you fit the system and everything's good, great. Right? You go through school, no issues, very few issues, very good. On the other hand, if you don't fit the system can spit you out. It's not perfect. It's a man-made system, but it's not perfect by any stretch. That's why they have all kinds of different schools. No one's a cookie cutter. Not everyone fits in school. I know somebody, their child was in a top school, right? A top school, and they got nitpicked for certain things. Made it seem like the child's bad. I mean, it's like nitpicking. Yeah. Parents took them out, put them in another school. They thrived. They don't have any problems. Nothing wrong with this child. I'm married, a bunch of kids, doing very good things. They could have been destroyed. Literally destroyed. So you say, okay, that school wasn't a good fit. Very good. Wasn't a good fit. It's not perfect. Right? For that child, that school wasn't a good fit. Okay. And someone says, well, you take the child out, what they can be, and this and that. Okay. Yeah. They're not thriving there. And they're not going to thrive there. Yeah. Because they're getting nitpicked for stupid things. Stupid things. So what does that do? Level, self-esteem goes down. They don't want to go to school. They feel like they're getting picked on, for minor things. Minor things that in bigger scheme of things don't matter. So you have an obligation to protect your child. So in that case, you leave the child in that system, in that school, over time, disaster. Be a disaster. Now again, even the best of schools, most kids hate school. They just don't like it. It's a lot of work, a lot of stress, different things. We have to know this, anyway, whatever it is. So again, it's not a perfect system. It's for sure not a perfect system. But it is what we have. So if a person doesn't fit, right? If they don't fit the system, you got to find a place for them. Can't leave them, can't leave them in the lurch. Right? They have to find a place that is fitting for them. So even if a school, God forbid, has to throw someone out, they have to find a place that's good for them. That's their obligation. You can't just throw a person out and they have nowhere to go. And some kids go through multiple schools because, all kinds of issues. The Chofetz Chaim makes this clear, says it in the commentary on the Torah, and he makes a very strong comment. And he says, following, it says, to throw out a child of school, is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Unless under unbelievable circumstances, you should never do it. Now, if they're going to have bad influence on other kids and this and that, they don't really fit in the school, you got to find them a place that's good for them. Says the Chofetz Chaim, I'll give you an example. Take Leonid Trotsky. Trotsky was a Jew. Went to a Jewish school. And for whatever he was doing in this school, gets a hard kid to deal with, they threw him out. Bad influence, whatever, they threw him out. And what did he do? What did this guy do when growing up? What did he do? He became part and parcel of communism. You don't know what the potential of a child is. Now again, if they're causing trouble, and kids are gonna learn bad from them, then you have no choice. So there was a student in yeshiva that was causing problems. And the rabbis of the yeshiva wanted to expel him. Wasn't necessarily having a bad influence on others, but they felt it wasn't good for him to be there. And the students themselves went, to the heads of the school and said, we want him to stay. Don't throw him out. made a whole big protest against it, can't throw him out, blah, blah, blah. He didn't know what the head of the yeshiva didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do because, he couldn't leave him there. Couldn't leave him there. So he didn't know what to do. So he sent a letter of Chaim Brisker. Chaim Brisker went to Torah Giants, more than 150 years ago, 200 years ago. He was the Rabbi Brisk. And send him a letter or telegram, whatever. Send him a telegram. What to do? Explain the situation. He said, "What do I do in this situation?" Rav Chaim answered him in three words. That's a whole long, drawn-out thing. He answered him in 3 words. What was the 3 words? Close the school. That was it. Said you got one bad egg, it's going to ruin the whole school. Close the school. That's what he did. Closed the school, went somewhere else, and started yeshiva somewhere else. What did Rav Chaim understand? You got one bad egg, relatively speaking. Either, basically, you're going to have a major fight with all the other students. If you throw them out, that's going to make, tremendous noise. It's going to be hard to have that type of yeshiva. So he said, close it. Shut it down. That's what he did. He started yeshiva somewhere else. Everyone else scattered, went to different places. He started from scratch. But better to start from scratch than ruin everybody else. Right? These are not simple things. There are some schools that only cater to certain people. Maybe the elite of the elites. They only want, students from people, the fathers are learning full time. They don't want people that work for different reasons. It's elitist. No, they can do what they want. So to speak. They're, person can open up a school, and have their own criteria. If they want to have a reputation, they could, destroy people at the same time. Education today, especially, right? Is not so easy because, the power of social media, the power of the power of the street, in general. Yeah. Let me deal with some questions here. Someone asked, Beis Din put him in jail, the pedophile. The Beis Din doesn't have that kind of power. Now, if the Beis Din, let's say, the rabbinical court is backed by the country, by the state, wherever they live. So but they could say this is what it is, and the person still doesn't do anything. You need the police to enforce it, right? That's why Beis Din's power is very weak today. Because even if, let's say, 2 litigants come in, Reuven and Shimon, stole money from Reuven, and Beis Din agrees that that Shimon owes the money, and Shimon doesn't pay. Now, what can Beis Din do? Beis Din has no power. So what they can do is if Reuven comes back and says Shimon never paid, they can bring in Shimon again. Let's say he never comes. Let's say they bring him in, say, why haven't you paid? He doesn't have a good excuse. Then they can tell him, go to secular court. Then they can say, we paskin he owes the money, right? He owes the money. We'll give you a letter. That's the only way you're allowed to go to secular court. You need a letter from the rabbinical court. So get a letter from the rabbinical court. You go to secular court and sue them. That you can do. Right? But you need permission from Beis Din. 100%, you can't do it on your own. You need, even if this guy's never going to come to Beis Din, you have to summon him. And if he doesn't come, first time, summon him again. Second time, then they call him up. They deliver it to his house. He doesn't show up the third time. Beis Din will listen to the case. If they feel the person's got merit in their case, they'll send him to secular court. But you're not allowed to go to secular court straight away. Right? It's a very, very severe prohibition. You can only go to secular court when Beis Din allows you. You can't just go on your own. Now, in a case like this, right? A person goes to Beis Din, they say, this guy's, pedophile, and we have evidence and this and that. Beis Din's powerless to do anything. They'll tell them if there's if there's evidence, they'll. I don't even really think, if you have strong enough evidence, you don't even need to go to Beis Din, right? You can go to the authorities, but you have to have pretty clear-cut evidence. So basically doesn't have power for them. So then go straight to the authorities, right? You don't have to worry about, going to basic. You see, let's say you saw an Orthodox Jew driving like a maniac. Yeah, weaving in and out of roads, out of lanes and this and that, really causing damage, whatever. Pay the license plate, call it in if you're able to. Or you call the police in general, say, listen, this guy's driving like a maniac. Whatever, you don't have to wait to go to base. This guy's a maniac, right? You don't have to wait, right? So certain things, clear as day, you don't have to wait. It obviously depends what it is. But again, going to basin over here, if you have enough evidence, you wouldn't have to, But it's probably better to go to basin. Like, listen, we got hard evidence on this guy. They're gonna bring him in, maybe, right? They may tell him go straight, go straight to the police. Because by the time they bring him in and this and that, the guy could be doing all kinds of things to other kids. They bring him in straight away. The problem is that, a kid says something, maybe they have a, they're taking revenge, on this person. Something maybe he said to them, maybe he did to them, but he didn't do this. Yeah, they have an axe to grind. So they say, he's a pedophile, and this is what he did. Right? So you got to take the threat seriously. You definitely, you have to question the kid, even though, a kid doesn't have any believability per se. Something like this. Okay, you got to question, see if there's merit to what he says. Because there are cases where the kid made it up. He's trying to ruin someone's reputation. It's a good way to do it. Very good way to do it. I know of a case where, a girl says against the rabbi, did this, that, and the other thing, or, accused of certain things, and they claim it happened 15 years ago, let's say. So got investigated, and it was false. Person had an axe to grind for something, whatever it was. But it was false. Now, what are they trying to do? Ruin someone's reputation. They are trying to ruin someone's reputation. Yeah. So now, see, this is why you can't believe Lashon Hara, per se. Right? Now you hear, look what happens. This person got accused X, Y, and Z. Okay, you got to take it seriously. In this case, they still let the person teach. The person had to fight it. And it came out as a lie. They were trying to ruin his reputation. But it was a lie. Again, I'm not saying all the time it's a lie. I don't know what the stats are. It doesn't matter. Right? You judge it individually. But if there's substance and it's true, okay. So then you got to take the appropriate measures. There are, people get their reputations ruined, and it can be very quick, especially online. Because good news and bad news equally travel like wildfire. Yeah. So even if someone's accused of something and they didn't do it, okay. Yeah. Now, the question is how much damage is already done. But if the person's exonerated, okay. But this is why you hear something, you hear a rumor, it's why you can't believe it. You can't believe it until you know what it is. Until it's gone to court or whatever. It's either gone one way or gone the other way. Okay. Yeah, but this is the problem. This is a huge problem because you hear something. Doesn't mean it's true. Maybe it is. Could be. But what if the person's known to do such things or has been accused before in the past? Okay. Yeah, but you still don't know. But if someone, at least has the guys, they look like they do good things and they keep Torah and they keep mitzvahs. Yeah, there's a mitzvah to give them the benefit of the doubt, even if it looks really bad. If it's someone who sins a lot, let's say a secular Jew, and there's a rumor that goes about them, they did X, Y, or Z. I don't have a mitzvah to not believe it. No mitzvah for me to give them the benefit of the doubt because they sin anyway. They don't keep Shabbos, they don't keep kosher, they don't keep anything. Why do I have to believe them? Why do I have to believe, why can't I believe what's being said? Well, let's say better. Forget about Lashon Hara, it's a different issue. Why do I not have to give the benefit of the doubt? Because they're already outside the boundaries here. They're outside the parameters. Let me tell me it's an Orthodox Jew. They've never really done anything wrong, let's say. Yeah, there's a mitzvah. There's an absolute mitzvah to give them the benefit of the doubt, even if it looks really, really bad. But a secular Jew who says I have to give them the benefit of the doubt, there's no mitzvah for me to give them benefit of the doubt because they sin all the time, right? Because you don't know what they do in their private life. They don't keep Shabbos. They don't keep kosher. Like this. They don't keep Shabbos. They don't keep kosher, or they do it half baked or whatever. No mitzvah for me to believe them. They have no believability in a rabbinical court either. Even if they're Jewish, doesn't matter. Right? If they're secular, they have no believability. Why would I think they have believability? They don't keep other Torah mitzvahs. Why should I think they're believed over here? I have no mitzvah to believe them. For just the opposite. I can't believe them. Right? Their testimony is bad. Why is the testimony bad? Right? That's what I'm learning now as well. Been learning this for a while, for the last couple of years. When it comes to testimony of this type of Jew, they have no credibility because they don't keep what they're supposed to. We see they don't keep what they're supposed to. So therefore, if they want to give testimony, I can't believe them. Now, what if they're telling the truth? Doesn't matter. You need other witnesses. You can't rely on them. What about a lie detector test? Doesn't matter. We're not using a lie detector test here. Right? They have no believability in general. No believability. Right? No offense to any secular Jews out there, but why would I think they tell the truth? Why should I think they tell the truth? You say, well, Orthodox Jews, maybe they look Orthodox, but they're not really Orthodox. Doesn't matter unless you prove that they're lying. You have other witnesses to disprove them. Okay. Right? So now you know the person's lying. Good. Yeah. But I can assume they're telling the truth unless I know otherwise. If I have other witnesses that go against what they say, that do not corroborate what they say, they disagree, different issue. Right? Someone brings witnesses in general, I can believe them. I don't have any reason not to believe them unless I have evidence against them. If I have evidence against them, very good. Then they're not credible witnesses. And then I'll get a name as not being a credible witness. Okay. But if they keep Torah mitzvahs, why should I assume they're lying? Unless they are. Then they're, the Gemara brings out plenty of cases where people hire other witnesses. They're false witnesses. There are people that would do that. Okay. So not so religious in the first place. Okay. But unless you prove that, then what's my assumption? The kosher Jews. Right? We don't, in general, if I don't know anything else, right? Let's say like this. Person comes to synagogue Monday, Thursday, or Shabbos, and he tells one of the people there, he says, I'm a Kohen. Says, I'm a Kohen. So they call him up first, right? Cohen gets called up first, Levi gets called up second, and everyone else gets called up. Yeah, for however many, times people get called up. Very good. Do I have to go check in his papers? I mean, he's not going to have papers anyway. Show he's a Kohen. Do I have to ask him, what cemetery your family buried in so we can check it out, look it up online? No. They're going to assume, unless they know otherwise, the person's telling the truth. Right? I had somebody that rabbi knew my family 4 generations or 5 generations. So when I got married, but a chief rabbinate here. So I had a letter. Now they may not know who he was or whatever, but it doesn't matter. Someone gave evidence and says, I know 5, or not evidence, but said, I know 4 or 5 generations of my family, and they're known to be Jewish. Someone asks, yeah, what about the 6th generation? What about the 7th generation? What about the 10th generation? The person doesn't know your family that far back. True. Now, are there any conversions in between then? No, not that's known. Do I have to go dig into the file to check? No. Oh, maybe all the mitzvahs you did. Maybe all the mitzvahs you've done up until this point, all blessings in vain. Because you didn't go back and check 6, 7 generations. Who says I have to? Who says anybody has to unless there's reason to? Someone comes, wants to convert, they say, they don't have proof that they're Jewish. They probably could be, right? There are some people I've come in contact with over the years that, probably were Jewish, but they couldn't prove it, right? They couldn't prove it. So, therefore, since they can't prove it, they have to go to conversion. Very good. Yeah. But there's something missing here. That's why you're calling it into question. Because they don't have evidence. Or there was maybe a pseudo conversion, 3 generations ago, or whatever the case is. But if what they say, if I don't have a problem, don't fix it. I'm not looking for issues. In these cases, there are issues. Because there's an issue, I have to call it into question. Now, if I call it into question, they don't have proof, they have to convert. That's what they have to do. But if I don't know anything otherwise, person says I'm a Jew, right? Let's say they don't say they're a convert. They say I'm a Jew. I don't have to go looking into their lineage unless I know there's a problem. If I know there's a problem, good. Then you have to check into it. Now, if someone comes and says, yeah, I converted 20 years ago with this Beis Din, and now the Beis Din is problematic, let's say, they'll call it into question. I'm not saying, that's always going to happen. Person went to a proper Beis Din, it should be a problem. Should not be a problem. Yeah, generations later. The person that I went through this Beis Din, 10 years ago, still got a good reputation. They're not going to question it. Right? They may ask for the certificate just to see it, but they're not going to question it. So, in general, we don't look for problems. Like someone will say, but you don't know 10 generations. You're right. I don't need to know 10 generations. If I know 3 generations, or even 2 generations, but they know them to be Jewish 100%, buried in Jewish cemeteries, that's it. If someone comes along and says, I have evidence, your great-great-grandmother had a Reform conversion, whatever, and it was hidden, and now it comes out, okay, that is going to call into question. That will be a question. Very good. But if I don't have that, why look for problems? You're gonna say that someone knew 4 or 5 generations of your family. You're gonna say, well, the 6, 7 generation they don't know, so all your blessings are in vain up until that point. Come on, no one's gonna say that. Nobody is gonna say that. It's hogwash, rubbish, as the English would say. Only when there's a problem. If there's a problem, okay, so then I have to investigate. If there's not a problem, what do I have to investigate? So this guy comes to the synagogue and says it's Cohen. I'm gonna sit and say, how do you know? Wait, parents, what's your name? No, we're gonna call him up. Now, if he's lying, he's lying. Yeah, but most people are gonna say they're a Kohen, they're not lying. Someone says, "But file be kept for generations." No, files are not going to be kept, but a cemetery will know. A person goes to the cemetery. It's an old, let's say, I grew up in Boston's old cemetery in Brookline, where most of my family's buried. They have a newer cemetery now, in Sharon, which is, suburb of Boston, probably about 20 minutes from where I grew up. It's kind of like, it's kind of like going to a golf, like going to a golf course. That's how, like immaculate, like the grass is, feel like, you're at the cemetery and all of a sudden you see, like someone's like playing golf on the other end. That's what, that's how immaculate it is. The other one's like totally falling apart. It's been falling apart, since I was a kid. Right. But, let's say in that cemetery in Brooklyn. Yeah. That's got, I use myself as an example. Got generations buried there. Yeah. All you have to do now, everything's online, everything's digital. So all you'd have to do is go online and put in a name. Put in a name in that cemetery. Yeah. And see if it comes up or see whatever it is. Right. That's where the files are going to be. Right. Basin doesn't cover, Basin's not going to have that. Right. It'll be part of the cemetery. Right. So someone wants to see if they have, relatives or whatever in the cemetery or wherever, it should come up. Now, what happens if it's in Europe? They don't have the records, right? Everything got destroyed. right? All the cemeteries in Europe like totally destroyed, right? So that you're not gonna have records, right? Even if you say, listen, got evidence, they were in Russia, whatever, during the Holocaust, you're not gonna have records, most likely. Maybe go to Yad Vashem, I don't know. You go to Holocaust, memorial place, whatever. But in general, if you don't have the records, which is going to be most likely by cemeteries, if you don't have the records, you won't have records. Basin doesn't have these records, right? If someone gets married, let's say, and they get married through a basin, well, they'll have those records. Yeah, and a person can get married through a basin. Yeah, let's say. It's not recorded there, then a basin would have it. Basin should have information. Should have that information. But not in this, back in the 50s and 40s, how many people got married by a basin? Most people, they get married by a basin. Certainly, people in Boston, how they get married? Probably the justice of the peace. Maybe with a rabbi, maybe a reform rabbi, conservative rabbi, I don't know. But a rabbinical court, if someone got married through them, they'll have the records. Right? They should have the records. Right? But I'm saying, if you're going back 60, 70 years, the only records you're going to have, are from the cemetery. I mean, listen, you could have basins in America from like the 40s and 50s. They'll also have information. They'll have information. But and if they don't have the information, they'll probably tell you to go online and check it out and different genealogical websites. As I'd say on that. Would the files be kept generations? Some of them for sure be kept. But again, everything now is digital, so it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to find, right? But I would assume a lot of these files over the years became digital, right? Became computerized, so it's much easier. But the problem is you had, especially in Europe, a lot of these files destroyed. Cemeteries destroyed. Like, it's very, very hard to find information. Very, very hard to do. Again, they have genealogical websites where they have quite a bit of information. That's where you'd have to go, right? If you don't have a cemetery, whatever, you have to do that online. Someone here mentioned, I want to get to this before. Someone says, you're giving a lot of brand, fabric, cotton, whatever. You looked at the fabric, had weird images. Yeah, transgendered, woke, garbage. Realized that. I got home and I thought maybe can bleach it out. I'm able to bleach it out. Would that be okay? Yeah. Yeah, if you can bleach it out, it doesn't, if it's idolatry, yeah, then you got a problem. But if it's not idolatry, which you don't have to, idolatry, you'd have to destroy, you'd have to burn it. That you wouldn't have a choice. If it's not idolatry, it's all like leftist, woke type of things. Could I bleach it out? Sure. Yeah. You could do that. You don't have to burn it, you don't have to destroy it. Right? If you can bleach it out, you still want to use it, you could do that. If you don't want to do that, just get rid of it. Right? You get rid of it, but you're allowed to get benefit from it. Someone asked, very good question. I know this is going to come up. Someone says family is important, but they are abusive. Very good. Parents, siblings, whatever. Yeah, it's possibly a gift from God as well. So Rabbi Kiva said, so we mentioned many times, Rabbi Kiva said, Kol David Rachmanu V'Toivo. Everything that God does is for the best. Now, we don't always understand that. Chofetz Chaim says nothing bad comes out of heaven, right? It's only good, but we don't always fathom how that can be. We see tragedies and other things. Okay. But even dealing with difficult people, there can be a benefit for us. Now you can say, well, a person gets messed up in the process. Person has a lot of anger towards what they've said, what they've done. Okay, this is all not easy things, right? Right? They're not, life isn't perfect, obviously. So if we have, people, family members that have done negative things, there's no, dealing with parents in general, we have to obligated, you're obligated to still alive to, honor them and, respect them. So if they're evil in general, I don't have to honor them, right? Meaning if they walk in a room, I don't have to stand up for them, right? I can't disparage them, can't make fun of them, can't embarrass them in public, certain things that, you're not allowed to do, right? You should have some level, of respect. But I mean, if they're really bad, then this comes up all the time, right? If they're really bad, yeah, then it's probably better not to have anything, to do with them. But what's the good that can come out of that? You see how people really are, right? And a person, what would they try and do? Never be like that. Again, we get the curse of going in the evil ways of our parents. Let's say, that the children pay for the sins of the parents because they went in their bad ways. Yeah, so even if they do bad things, right? Again, I'm not coming to condone it, right? So most likely you don't have an obligation to honor them. Okay. But even if you don't have an obligation to honor them, what you want to do to the best of your ability is make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes, right? And often, there's a lot, let's say there's a lot of negative that our parents brought to the table, and we take that negative and we do the same thing, right? The person, let's say a parent was an alcoholic, there's a good chance that child will be an alcoholic, right? I'm not saying across the board, but, there's good possibility. There's very good possibility that could happen because, again, these things get passed down. So, we got to work hard not to do that. So, we're given certain trials. Everybody's given certain trials that are manufactured specifically for them. And most of them we didn't ask for. You're born, right? You're born against your will, you die against your will. God gave you certain parents, right? Certain siblings, certain socioeconomic situation. We're not in charge of anything, nothing, right? The only question is how we react to it. So some people will get destroyed by it, right? Some people, be able to deal with it in a better way, but it makes us who we are. So is it a gift? I don't know I don't know if I call it a gift. I would say it's God putting you in putting your soul in a certain body to be able to help the soul reach its true perfection. But you can say, I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for these type of people. I didn't ask for this type of abuse. I didn't ask for these other things. You're right. Nobody signs up for this. Nobody would want it. But why do you have it? Because a lot of times it's because what your soul has to go through for whatever reason. Now, there are times we bring it upon ourselves. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where it's totally beyond your control. Yeah, there are people that, grew up in abusive relationships and it made them who they are today. They can help others because they've gone through it. Yeah, it doesn't mean every day is easy and every day is simple. I wouldn't say that, per se. People struggle with different things. People want to ask me, it's a gift? I wouldn't say it's a gift. Is it a benefit? Is there a benefit over here? You're going to say, but it looks so bad. And you're right. Right? It can be horrific. It can look really bad, but look what people can come out of it. Anyone knows the story of Nissim Black, right? He grew up in a crack house in Seattle. Grew up in a crack house. He was smoking weed by the time he was 12. Yeah. He got out of it. Miraculously, he got out of it. So he learned from it in different ways. Made him who he is today. If you were to pin him down and ask him, well, would it be better you didn't grow up in a crack house? He saw family members being arrested, house being, cops running in, this, that. Did he ask for that? Didn't ask for it. But it formed who he was. Made him change, made him look into things, and he became who he is. Yeah. Now, if you were to ask him, I don't know what his answer would be, but if you were to ask him, was that a gift? You think it's a gift from God? Was it a benefit? I can't answer for him. But it made him who he is, makes us who we are. But we don't choose it. No one's asking to be abused or go through these things. No one's asking for it, right? But I would say in general, though, it makes us who we are, right? 100%. It makes us who we are. Um, so you've heard the idea of being a bad parent. Yeah, it comes out. Kids will have all kinds of claims. All kinds of claims. Yeah, so you didn't do this for me, do that for me, do the other thing. Yeah. Maybe it's true. Maybe they have a good claim. Okay. Right. Can't we all be better? Sure. Shouldn't we all be better? Sure. But we are who we are. And could a kid complain later? Could a kid come later and say, you didn't do this for me, you do that for me, and I expected this and you weren't there? Yeah, they could have claim. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying they could. They definitely could. But I think as people get older and they see their own kids and they deal with their own things, they see that, what, my parents weren't so bad. Parents weren't so bad. Some other people have, they will have a grudge. They will have a grudge what the parents did. And sometimes, what, the parents are wrong. No question. No question. They should have done other things. But you know what? There's so many people out there that don't have a clue how to parent. They don't have a clue. And they make all kinds of bad decisions. The kids resent it. Kids resent it. Why couldn't I do this? Other kids did that. You took me out. You made me feel bad. Parents are human. They are human. I'm not saying they don't make mistakes. They can make plenty of mistakes. The question is what the relationship's like. Could a kid bear a grudge? Total prohibition. Could they bear a grudge? They could. So you did this. You didn't do this for me. You didn't stand up for me. Okay. But I would say if someone has like some level of mental illness and like they're not all there, it's not your fault. Damage probably is already done, but in the bigger scheme of things, that's who they are. You're not going to change them. The question is, deal with them. But there's some people who don't want to deal with it. They just want to say, you did this, you did that, whatever. But they're not in the right mind, right? There's some parents that just do what they do, and they're terrible people. Some better, some worse, whatever. But in general, it's pretty amazing. Kids can come out normal. I'm not even talking about going to college and social media and all that. Forget about that. I'm just talking about living by the parents, right? And some parents do terrible things, right? No question. Someone asks, can Eino had learn the book Lashon Hara by the Chofetz Chaim? Could. It doesn't apply to them. Something that doesn't apply because a lot of laws in Lashon Hara they're not universal. They're not universal. But books of ethics in general, learning path of the just, learning the ways of the righteous, learning Jewish philosophy, let's say Derech Hashem, these type of things, it's not a problem. That's not a problem. What's your opinion on the sentence used by a few Chabadniks, God needs us? He doesn't. I got a problem with it. Yeah, the whole thing with Manis Friedman, Rabbi Manis Friedman. But, there are those that say, according to Kabbalah, that God may need us and he needs to perfect creation. Okay, but I'm not looking for Webster's 8th definition. God does not need us, period. Yeah, that's a general rule. Now, some people say that doesn't make him a heretic. So I'm not getting involved. Right? I've spoken about it a number of times. I'm not getting involved. Right? The bottom line is it's a very hard thing to say. It's a very, very hard thing to say. I know some people have defended him, big people have defended him, and said that, there are sources that say that. Okay. Yeah, maybe there are. Maybe there are Kabbalistic sources, there are Hasidic sources that say that. Okay. The vast majority of sources don't. And the vast majority of sources don't, I wouldn't say that. Right? I wouldn't say that because it goes against, the Rambam's first principle that God is absolute. What does God being absolute mean? It means he doesn't need us. Right? He doesn't need us. The Ramchal in Path of the Just in the beginning, in his introduction, right? He says, why God create the world? Well, God has no needs. Not my language, his language. God has no needs. If he has no needs, why did he create the world? He couldn't create it for himself, because by definition, he has no needs. So if he has no needs, what did he create it for? For us. Because God is the Meikti, he wants to give him his goodness. But he has no needs, right? There are plenty of sources to show that saying God doesn't need us is wrong, period. It's wrong, right? Now, some other people want to say there are sources that show that at some level he does. Okay. You want to tell me it's Chassidus, you want to tell me it's, in some cases it's Steve and Kabbalah, whatever, okay. Right? The vast majority say not that way. Now, some will come to his defense and say that doesn't make him a heretic. I don't know. Yeah. Others would say differently. So you want to pin me down and say, what do I think? I think God absolutely has no needs. Right? That's what I'll say. Yeah, let me see other questions here. The God needs its phrase. It's not the only thing. Oh, it doesn't matter. That wasn't the question. I was addressing the question. The question was, he said, does God need us? That was the question. Yeah, I wasn't addressing anything else he said. Right? He said other things also. Good. That wasn't the question. I only addressed the question that was asked. Period. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Saturday, 2:30 Eastern Time, 9:30 Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, ethics for our fathers, Leviticus. Anyone has any questions, send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBVICHIMCOFFMAN, and